Chapter 3. Is the sexual impulse due to natural instinct or to food stimulation? In the light of the above considerations concerning the influence of food on sexual desire and behavior, the question arises whether all sex desire is the result of chemical stimulation, rather than being due to natural instinct, or the hypothetical libido of the Freudians. The mechanistic theory of the origin of sexual impulses, as against the theory of their instinctive origin, was upheld by the great American biologist, Professor Jacques Loeb, whose theory of tropisms closely resembles the theory of conditioned reflexes of Professor Pavlov. According to this conception, all sexual phenomena, both psychical and physical, is a product of physico-chemical stimulation, and not due to instinct at all. In fact, no such thing as sexual instinct exists. According to Professor Loeb, the sexual impulse, in all its manifestations, is a product of chemical and physical stimulation from the environment, constituting a tropistic reaction to physico-chemical stimuli, and is therefore subject to physico-chemical control. This new conception of sexual phenomena having a physical and chemical origin opens up the possibility of a new method of sexual therapy in psychiatry, in place of the older method of psychotherapy, based on the psychoanalytical approach. For if, according to Loeb's conception, neuroses and psychoses have a biochemical and endocrinological origin, rather than a psychic one, then the cure of nervous and mental diseases must consist in a normalizing of the blood chemistry and the functioning of the endocrine glands, and not by the methods employed by the psychoanalysts or by psychiatrists in the past. Loeb's theory of tropisms is part of his general mechanistic theory of vital phenomena, which is now accepted as the foundation of modern biology and physiology. It is the purpose of this chapter to show that this concept offers a satisfactory explanation of sexual phenomena, which can be accounted for on a purely physico-chemical basis, without resorting to the dualistic conceptions of the psychoanalysts and psychologists of the past, who considered body and mind as two separate and interacting entities. Loeb bases his conception of sex on a monistic materialistic conception, and considers sexual acts as tropistic responses, or conditioned reflexes in reaction to stimuli from the environment, by control of which it is possible to control the reactions they elicit. According to Loeb's theory of tropisms, sexual behavior of organisms, like all other forms of behavior, obeys the general biological laws that govern tropistic responses to stimuli, or conditioned reflexes of the Pavlov school of reflexologists. This mechanistic conception does away with the hypothetical sexual instinct of the older psychologists, or the libido of the psychoanalysts. According to this new and more scientific conception, sexual behavior, both psychic and physical, is due to physico-chemical stimuli, which come from the environment and constitute an automatic tropistic reaction. This opens the way to achieving sexual control by control over the stimuli which evoke sexual responses, and for the establishment of a new scientific sex morality on a biochemical, mechanistic basis. In his theory of tropisms, which created a revolution in biological thought, Professor Loeb provided the basis for a mechanistic theory of sexual behavior, in terms of forced tropistic reactions to physical and chemical stimuli. The sexual problem then becomes a physiological and biochemical one, rather than a psychological and moral one, as previously considered to be. In place of the psychological and moral one, as previously considered to be. In place of the psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, moralist, or priest, according to this new conception, the biochemist endocrinologist would be the only one qualified to handle such problems. If the human being is a machine automatically reacting to stimuli, the solution of the problems of sexual behavior will consist in applying determined stimuli, which will bring forth desired responses. In this way, we can achieve absolute sex control and have the basis for a new scientific sex morality and method of sexual therapy. Those will replace the antiquated methods of religion, psychiatry, and psychoanalysts, based as they were on a false dualistic conception of psychic causation and cure, on which current moral and judicial codes are based. A French biochemist, Jacques Fischer, has applied Loeb's mechanistic tropistic theory to the field of sexology, and in his book entitled Love and Morality, an attempt at a physiological interpretation of human thought, presents a new theory of sexual phenomena as products of chemical stimulation by metabolic toxins, hormones, etc. According to Fischer, sexual impulses do not come from any sexual instinct, nor have a purely psychic origin, but constitute tropistic responses to biochemical stimuli present in the blood and having their origin in alterations of the blood chemistry by foods, beverages, toxins, hormones produced by the endocrine glands, etc. On the basis of this conception, Fischer seeks to convert problems of sex morality into problems of biochemistry. By altering the diet, and hence the blood chemistry, Fischer believes it is theoretically possible to convert a saint into a sinner and vice versa. This opens up the possibility of a new method of nutritional, biochemical sexual therapy to replace the methods employed by the systems of morality and methods of psychotherapy employed by psychiatrists and psychoanalysts. It means to replace religion by biochemical and endocrinological techniques for altering the individual's sexual psychology and behavior to the degree that the older moralistic and psychological methods never achieved. In this way, we will gain absolute scientific control over sexual phenomena, as we have achieved over other natural phenomena, and will become their master and no longer their slave. This will enable us to harness and control this force and direct it along constructive rather than destructive channels, sublimating it into higher cerebral manifestations of intellectual creativeness and genius, rather than permit it to be wasted in senseless and debilitating indulgences, which serve no purpose, biological or otherwise. Such are the possibilities that Loeb's and Fischer's biochemical approach to sexual problems open up to us. That the sexual psychology and behavior of the organism has a physico-chemical origin is clearly shown by experiments in sex reversal, in which by a simple operation, glandular transplantation, it is possible to masculinize females and feminize males, thereby changing sex at will. In such cases, there is no need to call in some hypothetical sexual instinct or Freudian libido to explain the observed phenomena, which can be accounted for purely mechanistically, in terms of automatic reactions to biological stimuli, i.e., to the physiological effects of sex hormones. In evidence of the fact that sexual behavior consists of a complex of tropistic reactions to stimuli and conditioned reflexes, Lilly found that in the Nereis infusoria, the female, at a certain phase of their sexual cycle, poured into the vessel in which they were kept traces of a special substance, which he called fertilizin, and it was further observed by Just that when the male organisms of the same species were placed in the water in which such fertilizin was present, they at once began to emit sperm. It is thus clear that in these sexual organisms, which are extremely responsible to the water in which they swim, sexual behavior is entirely dominated by chemical stimuli from the environment. If, in lower organisms, sexual behavior thus has a chemical basis and explanation, then why not in higher ones as well, in both their psychic and physical manifestations? Loeb believes that this is the case, and that higher organisms are as mechanistically determined by the internal chemical environment of their blood as the Nereis infusoria is by its external one. In animals and human beings, sexual reactions arise from chemical stimuli of this internal environment, and consists of alterations of blood chemistry by hormones produced by the gonads and other glands, as well as by toxins and metabolic end products, resulting from the substances that enter our bodies in the form of food and become part of the blood. In addition, there are other environmental stimuli, which determine sexual responses, as special odors given off by the body during mating seasons, or when under the influence of strong erotic desire. Here we have a phenomenon similar to the chemotropism, chemical tropism, or automatic sexual responses of the infusoria. The influence of hormones and toxins in the human blood in determining sexual behavior is of a similar nature. Loeb believes that all the physiological and psychological manifestations of sexuality in man can be accounted for on a similar chemotropistic basis, as mechanistically determined reflexes and responses to chemical and physical stimuli. According to Loeb's tropistic theory, the concept of instinct and will can have no place in scientific biology, since all actions of the organism are tropisms, or forced responses to stimuli. He defines tropism as an automatic orientation in a field of force, toward or away from the center of the force. This force may be mechanical, gravitational, chemical, or electrical. In any case, the organism automatically reacts to stimuli acting upon it, responding to them in a determined mechanistic manner. Under such conditions, there can be no talk of voluntary decision of instinct, just as there cannot be in the case of a machine. In his book, Forced Movements, Tropisms, and Animal Conduct, Loeb presents evidence in favor of his theory that all the actions of the animal and human organism are determined by external and internal, hormonal, etc. stimuli, and that the concept of purposiveness in behavior and free will must be completely discarded and replaced by one of automatic reactions in terms of the quantitative laws of mechanical causation. However, rather than make man a slave of sexual impulses, this conception enables him to become their master. For he does have free will in determining to which type of stimuli he will permit himself to be subjected, and by selecting the desired stimuli, he can control the resulting sexual responses accordingly. The term forced movements has been borrowed by Loeb from brain physiology and applied by him to animal behavior in general. It designates the fact that certain animals are no longer able to move in a straight line when certain parts of the brain are injured, but are compelled to deviate constantly toward one side. The explanation of these forced movements is that on account of the one-sided injury to the brain, the tension of the symmetrical muscles is no longer the same. Loeb applied this concept to animal behavior in general and concluded that actions of the animal that appear to be expressions of will and purpose are in reality a complex of such forced movements, which are mechanistically determined. The sexual behavior of man, Loeb says, is also a complex of forced movements, determined by chemical stimuli in his blood, including hormones, toxins, etc. According to Loeb, the animal body is a chemical machine, having no power of self-determination, and acts in tropistic response to stimuli. Whether the stimuli that control behavior are external or internal, endocrine secretions, in either case the activity of the organism is tropistic, automatically responding to these stimuli. So-called instincts, in Loeb's opinion, are really complexes of tropisms. In the case of sexual behavior of animals during the mating seasons, in such case the stimuli consist of certain seasonal electrical charges in the atmosphere and environment, which acting on the sex glands of the animal lead to the production of hormones that determine sexual behavior. Loeb writes, "Hormone produced by definite tissues therefore influence the instincts. We want to show that this influence is due to a modification of tropistic reactions by the hormones. The sexual behavior of the organisms may be considered as a complex of chemotropisms, or automatic reactions evoked by chemical stimuli in the bloodstream, and is not due to instinct as formerly supposed." In evidence of his conception of sexual behavior as a chemotropism, Loeb cites the example of the fungulus fish, which sheds its eggs at the mating season as a result of a stereotropism, resulting from contact with another fish. If the sexes are separated at this time, the same reaction is induced by the fish coming in contact with the glass walls of the aquarium. Whitman has observed a similar sexual stereotropism among male pigeons, which will mate with solid objects in their field of vision, if kept in isolating during the mating period. On the basis of such observations, Loeb concludes, these few examples may suffice to show that the theory of tropism is at the same time the theory of instincts, if due consideration is given to the rule of hormones in producing certain tropisms and suppressing others. A systematic analysis of tropisms and hormones will probably yield rich results. In the case of higher organisms, Loeb considers the mating instinct to be determined by tropisms aroused by specific internal secretions produced by the endocrine glands. Thus, while the persistent courtship of a human male for a definite female may appear as an example of persistent will, yet, in Loeb's opinion, it is a complicated tropism in which sex hormones and memory images are the determining factors. Removal of the sex glands abolishes the courtship, and replacing the sex glands by those of the opposite sex may lead to a complete reversal of sex instincts. What appears at first sight as persistent will is therefore essentially a tropistic reaction. Indicating the fact that his theory of tropisms opens up a new biochemical approach to problems of neurology and psychiatry, in his book The Mechanistic Conception of Life, Loeb says, "I believe that the investigation of the conditions that produce tropisms may be of importance for psychiatry. If we can call forth in an animal which drives it irresistibly into a flame, if the same thing can be brought about by means of a secretion of the reproductive glands, we have given, I believe, a group of facts, within which the analogies necessary for psychiatry can be called forth and experimentally investigated." Loeb's conception that the sexual instinct, in all its manifestations, can be explained in terms of tropistic reactions to chemical stimuli is confirmed by the observations of Heap, Marshall, and others on the rutting, or heat, of animals. This is preceded by a genital congestion of blood, causing a turgescence of the sex organs, which is called forth by sex hormones. This is proven by the fact that when they are injected into an animal at any time of the month or year, the same phenomena of rutting follow. It has also been shown that chemical stimuli derived from food can produce similar effects. For when animals are domesticated and artificially fed, it is known that the frequency of rutting periods increases. This is well known to breeders, who by overfeeding, technically known as flushing, are able to cause more frequent sexual activity and increase the fertility of animals. The heightened sexual activity of animals under such conditions is clearly not a product of natural instinct, but is a chemotropism produced by food stimulation on top of normal hormone stimulation. The French biochemist Jacques Fischer, in his work previously referred to, has applied Loeb's concept of chemotropism to the general phenomena of human sexuality and sexual behavior, as determined by chemical stimulation, rather than by instinct or the hypothetical sexual libido of Freud. Fischer believes that the origin of erotic phenomena consists in certain chemicals in the blood, such as hormones, toxins, and metabolic end products, whose action on various brain centers, erogenous nerve centers, and glands result in the typical physiological and psychological manifestations of human sexuality. Fischer believes that the erotic crisis may be compared to an asthmatic attack, since both may be evoked by the action of toxins in the blood, such as uric acid, upon certain nerve centers. He attributes the asthmatic attack to a flocculation of uric acid in the capillaries of the lungs, the seizure being brought on by the action of this uric acid on the bulbar nucleus of the pneumogastric nerve, which often comes about a few hours after a meal, when the blood contains the most uric acid, derived principally from such foods as meat and other animal proteins. The erotic crisis, according to Fischer, is due to a similar chemical causation. First, a rise in the concentration of uric acid in the blood, augmented by uric acid-producing foods and drinks, as animal proteins, coffee, etc., and then the irritation of the sexual nerve centers by the toxic blood that results when these foods are metabolized. In support of this view, it is interesting to note that all foods that contain or form large quantities of uric acid are known to have marked aphrodisiacal properties. Chief among them are oysters, caviar, and other seafoods, meat, fowl, coffee, tea, beer, etc. As in the case of asthma, writes Fischer, erotic impulses are often found in definite relation to alimentary intoxication, excess of feeding. He then goes on to show that the actions of the resulting metabolic toxins on various cerebral and spinal nerve centers, and on the mucous lining of the prostatic urethra, which is the seat of sexual sensibility in man, can result in psychological and physical sexual manifestations. Fischer adds, irritation of these well-defined bulbar cerebral nuclei will serve to explain the muscular manifestations of the sex impulse, as well as the organic conception of emotional phenomena accompanying it. We see that this whole set of actions, making up an attack of erotomania, is easily explained by the irritation of certain cerebral zones by the modified blood. A clear proof of the chemotropic nature of the sexual impulse in man as automatic reactions to chemical stimuli in the blood is afforded by the study of the effects of aphrodisiacs upon the human body and brain, in which case, writes Fischer, we observe the genesis not only of physical, but of psychological sexual excitations. Fischer's theory, in short, is that both the normal and pathological manifestations of sexuality in men are chemotropisms, determined by the chemistry of the blood, which in turn is influenced by two major factors: hormones produced by the endocrine glands and toxins and chemical end products of metabolism. An increase in blood pressure, caused by an overconsumption of animal protein and resulting formation of uric acid in the blood, in Fischer's opinion, can precipitate an erotic attack, just as it can precipitate an asthmatic attack or an attack of gout. The problems of sexual morality and sexual therapy thus resolve themselves into problems of biochemistry. Pathological manifestations of sexuality, according to this conception, have their origin in an abnormal blood chemistry, which can be corrected by a biochemical alteration of the composition of the blood through diet, which affects the chemical composition of the blood and the functioning of the endocrine glands. Fischer's mechanistic theory of human sexual behavior traces the sexual process through three main successive stages. 1. A biochemical stage, an alteration of the chemistry of the blood by hormones, toxins, and end products of metabolism, the latter usually acting on the gonads, stimulating them to overactivity. 2. A cerebral stage, the action of the chemically altered blood upon the brain and erogenous nerve centers. And 3. A muscular stage, sexual acts terminating in the orgasm. We have referred previously to the effect of uric acid, produced by the metabolism of meat and other animal proteins, as well as certain vegetable proteins to a more limited extent, as an aphrodisiacal stimulant, for which reason foods and beverages that introduce much uric acid into the blood, as flesh foods and coffee, are known to be sexual stimulants. The same is true of tea, cocoa, and chocolate, which also contain uric acid, in addition to other aphrodisiacal substances, as caffeine, theophylline, and theobromine. According to most authorities, the seat of sexual sensibility lies in the mucous lining of the prostatic urethra, and since uric acid acts as an irritant of this mucous membrane and tends to set up inflammatory processes therein, we can understand by Dr. Alexander Haig, in his extensive research on uric acid, as recorded in his book, Uric Acid, A Factor in the Causation of Disease, shows that there is a definite relation between the concentration of uric acid in the blood and intensity of sexual feeling, which is indirectly related to the action of uric acid in increasing the blood pressure and the effect of increased blood pressure on heightened sexual desire, while lower blood pressure reduces it. Dr. Haig illustrates the influence of blood pressure on the sexual impulse by referring to the case of the opium addict, who, when in a state of opium well-being, when the capillaries are free and the blood pressure low, has no sex desire whatsoever, but later on, during the stage of rebound, when the blood pressure is high, strong sexual desire appears. Since foods that introduce considerable uric acid into the body increase the blood pressure, as is true of meat and other flesh foods, we can thus account for their aphrodisiacal effect. On this subject, Dr. Haig writes, "Where the sexual impulse is excessively strong, we can accomplish more by reducing the blood pressure than by moral suasion. In a word, we should treat the morbid circulatory condition and leave morality to right itself when a satisfactory cerebral circulation has been restored by the use of a suitable diet." Now, it is interesting to note that uric acid containing and forming foods and beverages, as meat, coffee, etc., tend to increase the blood pressure, and these same substances are aphrodisiacal. In Dr. Benedict's experiment on the influence of the protein intake on the sexual life of a group of 24 young American men who were put on low-protein diet for 4 months, there occurred a marked fall in blood pressure coincident with a corresponding diminution and disappearance of sexual desire. But when the previous high-protein diet and greater consumption of meat was resumed at the end of the experiment, the blood pressure rose, and so did sexual desire at the same time. The same was true of involuntary sexual manifestations, as nocturnal emissions, which practically disappeared during the period of low-protein feeding, and returned with usual intensity when the protein intake was high. Dr. Benedict's experiments proved conclusively that both the voluntary and involuntary phenomena of human sexuality are under the control of the diet. Uric acid is a toxin formed in the blood by foods rich in protein, especially of animal origin, and hence is an outstanding aphrodisiac. Uric acid is a normal end product of the metabolism of nucleoproteins, which are abundant in meat and other flesh foods. These also contain preformed uric acid, in addition to what they generate through metabolic decomposition. It is interesting to note that meat also contains a toxin known as creatine, which has the tendency to increase blood pressure. We can thus understand why meat is such a strong sexual stimulant, and while a vegetarian diet low in protein has been recommended by physicians and philosophers since time immemorial as a means of reducing sexual tendencies, back to the days of Pythagoras, who first recommended a low-protein diet as a means of making continence easy and natural, a doctrine which his disciples successfully practiced, and which Apollonius of Tyana, 5 centuries later, made the foundation of a new naturalistic religion, which he taught during the 1st century AD. The aphrodisiacal effect of alcoholic beverages is also associated with their effect to increase the blood pressure. The same is true of tea and coffee, which are strong aphrodisiacs and which contain preformed uric acid. In the case of a woman, a periodic increase and decrease of blood pressure has been noted during the menstrual cycle, the periods of increased blood pressure coinciding with periods of increased uterine engorgement and heightened sexual feeling, while the reverse occurs when the blood pressure dropped after menstruation. According to the 2 great French medical sexologists, Doctors Tissot and Delon, the seat of sexual sensibility lies in the mucous membranes of the prostatic urethra in the male and their associated nerves, and the irritation of this mucous membrane by acids and toxins explains the action of aphrodisiacs and uric acid in evoking sexual impulses, which are transmitted first to the brain and then to the organs of the body, in which they set up circulatory and muscular reactions. It is for this reason that unusual sexual excitement is sometimes a forerunner of an act of gout, which may be explained when we consider that the initiation of the local symptoms of this disease is usually preceded by the irritation of several mucous membranes, by the increased condition of uric acid in the blood at this time. The irritating action of this uric acid on the mucous membranes of the prostatic urethra explains the sexual excitement preceding the attack. Referring to a similar relationship in the case of tuberculosis, Dr. Tissot writes, "Does not the salacity which all authors have mentioned as being peculiar to tubercular persons depend on the part which the genito-urinary mucous membrane takes in the general excitement of the mucous membranes, which is so common in the tuberculous affection of the lungs? It is well known that all substances that act most effectively as aphrodisiacs are mucous membrane irritants, including onions, garlic, salt, pepper, mustard, and other stimulating spices and condiments. Like Tissot, Dr. Daylon also points out that irritation of the genital mucous membranes by excessive consumption of uric acid-producing foods, meats, and especially seafoods, will augment the sexual impulse, and that it is by their irritating effect on the genital mucous membrane that the effects of aphrodisiacs, as cantharides, are due. Therefore, to control the sexual impulse, when it is excessively strong, he advises the elimination from the diet of all foods and drinks which introduce irritating acids, especially uric acid, into the blood, which irritate the genito-urinary mucous membrane. We should remember that besides uric acid, meats and other animal proteins also metabolize to form nitric, sulfuric, phosphoric, and other strong acids. Daylon claims that the irritated and inflammatory condition of the genital mucous membranes are most often the result of hyperacidity of the blood and urine, produced by a highly acid-forming diet, which exercises an aphrodisiacal effect. To reduce such irritation and diminish excessive sexual inclinations, Daylon recommends to make the blood and urine more alkaline through an alkaline-forming diet. This means the replacement of acid-forming vegetables and fruits. He employed this diet to overcome sexual aberrations and nocturnal emissions and reduce excessive sexual tendencies. Dr. Daylon wrote as follows concerning the effect of an alkaline-forming diet in reducing inflammation of the genital mucous membranes, which lies at the basis of excessive sexual desire, as well as pathological manifestations of sexual behavior. In his treatise on the diseases produced by masturbation, Daylon writes, "In every case of genito-urinary disease, in which there exists irritation or inflammation, the first indication is to neutralize the normal acidity of the urine, or better still to make it slightly alkaline if possible, by regulation of the diet, and attention to the vicarious elimination of the products of retrograde metamorphosis. Neutral or faintly alkaline urine is much less irritating to the inflamed mucous membrane than the normal secretion." The phrase normal acidity of the urine, in the author's opinion, is a misnomer, since the urine is normally alkaline on a low-protein vegetarian diet, while it is acid on a high-protein meat diet. Experiments have proven that a low-protein alkaline vegetarian diet will cause nocturnal emissions, which are pathological and not normal as commonly supposed, to disappear. In the light of the above considerations, the sexual problem resolves itself into a biochemical problem, and sex morality becomes a branch of applied biochemistry. The sexual biochemist then replaces the moralist, psychoanalyst, psychiatrist, and priest, who all tried to solve the sexual problem by purely psychic means, failing to recognize its physical and chemical origin. By altering the chemical conditions responsible for human sexual energies along more health-giving and socially constructive channels, he will harness the sex force to uplift man, as occurs when he is its slave. Sexual biochemistry will replace sexual morality, and the scientist will replace the priest. According to the new mechanistic philosophy of sex here presented, psychoanalysis, like traditional psychiatry, must be discarded as based on a false dualistic conception of body and mind as two separate entities, capable of interacting on each other, and as against psychoanalysis, which seeks to trace physical effects to psychic causes. Our new point of view considers the psychic phenomena of sex as derived from basic biochemical and physiological processes, and as being secondary rather than primary, nor can it admit the existence of purely psychic factors such as libido, complexes, suppressed memories, etc., as having any real existence, or capable of acting as causes of organic processes. Freudianism is in a large sense a rationalization of modern sexual behavior, which seeks to provide scientific justification for sexual actions that are really unnatural and are products of aphrodisiacal food stimulation. Chief among the errors of this new pseudo-scientific phallic cult is the superstition that Freud picked up from the gutter and dressed in scientific garb, that sexual abstinence is harmful and a cause of nervous and mental disorders, as the result of sexual repression that it involves, and that sexual intercourse is a normal expression of the libido, which is necessary for health, which belief has led many misinformed physicians to advise young men to visit prostitutes and risk venereal disease as a lesser evil than the summed evil effects of sexual continence. In later pages we shall see that this belief is without scientific foundation and is contradicted by the scientific evidence presented in this book. Freud makes this myth, in the form of his doctrine of repression, the cornerstone of his pseudo-scientific edifice. He himself was a sick, neurasthenic man. His picture shows him smoking a cigar, a powerful aphrodisiac. His entire philosophy of sex, to a large extent, has been colored by the chemotropistic influence of his tobacco addiction, without him being aware of it, plus his diet, which failed to keep him in health. As a matter of fact, the present post-Freudian neurotic age suffers not from sexual abstinence and repression, but from the reverse, from sexual overexpression and overindulgence. Nowhere in Freud's work do we find a warning against sexual excess as a cause of nervous diseases and insanity, which it is admitted to be by eminent authorities. Instead of attributing neurasthenia to its true cause, i.e., lecithin deficiency and resulting nerve cell undernutrition, resulting from loss of lecithin through semen, Freud wrongly traces it to sexual repression, or underindulgence in sexual activity, and his cure in uninhibited sexual intercourse. In forwarding this view and popularizing it, Freud has elevated the most groundless of popular superstitions and unscientific misconceptions into a scientific theory, which in the light of modern knowledge of sexual biochemistry and endocrinology must be thrown into the scrap heap of discarded pseudo-scientific theories and regarded as a rationalization to appease the conscience of modern neurotic sexual overindulgers and to create a large financial income by sale of his books, which appealed greatly to public demand. In place of Freud's attempt to trace the physical phenomena of sex to a psychic causation, i.e., to his assumed libido in normal or abnormal expression, our new mechanistic view of biochemical sex determination holds that all sexual phenomena, both physical and psychical, can be explained in terms of Loeb's chemotropisms, or reflex reactions to chemical stimuli, as hormones, toxins, and metabolic products which act on erogenous nerve and brain centers, and evoke responses in the form of sexual behavior. Among such stimuli, the one most potent in determining the psychophysical sexual behavior of civilized man is food.